Chapter 34, First Day of Homeschool. It was 7:49 a.m. when Nick stepped out of his room, a quiet storm of anticipation and unease swirling inside him. As he made his way downstairs, the reality of his new routine was beginning to settle in. Dressed in a dark blue shirt with charcoal grey shoulders and matching denim trousers, he had chosen long sleeves carefully, more to hide the bruises from his latest encounters as Zeus than to keep warm. Upon entering the living room, he was met with a surprising sight. The entire space had been transformed. The modular sofa had been split into 4 separate segments, each spaced evenly apart, with Anne, James, and Connor already seated. Their backs were turned towards the door, facing the large bay window that allowed in the soft morning light. Each sofa had a sleek, built-in tray folded neatly over their laps. With the press of a button, the trays extended outward, ideal for eating, or in this case, study materials. At the front of the room, a new desk had been positioned for May, complete with a small stack of files and a digital notepad. It looked less like a living room and more like a boutique classroom. "So, this is what our school looks like now," Nick said with a half smile as he took the empty seat next to Anne. Anne turned to him, her grin infectious. "You wouldn't believe it, Nick, but Mum is an incredible teacher. 1 minute, she's explaining how to properly prepare broth. The next, she's giving a full history lecture on the development of algebra." James piped up from his seat. "Apparently, she had private tutors growing up. Her parents were pretty loaded back in China, wanted her to focus on finance." "That's true," Anne confirmed, her voice tinged with both pride and melancholy. "But Mum always wanted to be a chef. Visiting her grandmother in the countryside was the only time she felt free. Grandma taught her how to cook and work hard. Mum hated letting the maids do everything. Once, her dad fired a maid just because Mum was helping her clean up. He went ballistic, said she was embarrassing the family, and told her that once she married some rich businessman's son, her only job would be to look pretty and bear him a son." Anne leaned back in her seat, eyes narrowing as she muttered bitterly, "Wanker." Nick listened closely, feeling a deeper respect for May begin to solidify. Clearly, a life of rigid expectations and quiet rebellion shaped her warmth and resilience. "She seems like a very compassionate person," he said thoughtfully. "It makes a big difference, especially as a teacher." Connor, who had been unusually quiet, leaned forward. "Have you ever spoken to your grandparents?" Anne's expression soured. "No, and quite frankly, I don't fucking want to." Her voice dropped to a cold murmur. "According to Mum, I'm not good enough for them. I'm only half Chinese, which to them makes me a stain on their perfect bloodline." She glanced away, her lip curled in disgust. "Cunts," she whispered under her breath. The others fell into a thoughtful silence, each sensing that any further comments might only deepen the wound. Anne's pain wasn't just personal. It carried the weight of a wider truth rooted in history. During the Grand War, the United Asian Alliance had shut its borders to the rest of the world. In the wake of that isolation, interethnic relationships with people from outside Asia had become rare and often frowned upon. A rigid sense of racial purity took hold within many UAA families, with parents strongly encouraging their children to marry within their country to maintain what they deemed an untainted bloodline. Connor sat quietly, reflecting on Anne's story as a familiar pang stirred within him. As someone of mixed heritage himself, half Japanese with a British father, he had navigated his path through awkward stares and whispered comments. Fortunately, his experience had been kinder. His Japanese relatives had welcomed him with warmth, his mother's presence softening any tension. They had chosen to accept him for who he was, not what he represented. "I'm sorry about that, Anne," he said at last, his voice quiet but steady. "It's not right that they can't see you for who you are." Anne glanced up at him, her expression softening. "Thanks," she murmured. "It's just frustrating, you know? I wish they'd realise that being different doesn't make me less. It makes me more." Nick leaned back slightly, his arms crossed as he joined the conversation. "It's heartbreaking how small-minded people can be," he said. "They miss out on knowing someone as brilliant and strong as you, just because they're clinging to outdated ideas." Anne gave a dry laugh and rolled her eyes. "Ugh, don't even get me started. I've learnt to live with it, but it still gets to me occasionally. I've just decided I'd rather keep my distance from people who see the world through such a narrow lens." James, who had been quietly listening, gave a solemn nod. "Their loss, really." The moment lingered, not heavy with sadness, but charged with the quiet resilience of a group that understood what it meant to be overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, and what it meant to rise above it. Soon, the unmistakable rhythm of heels echoed down the staircase. Anne, already familiar with the routine, smirked knowingly. "Look lively, boys, the teacher's on her way. Sit up straight and mind your manners." Nick, James, and Connor straightened instantly. Their casual demeanour gave way to mock formality. The atmosphere shifted, still light-hearted, but charged with a spark of anticipation. A moment later, the soft click of heels echoed in the hallway, growing steadily louder until the door opened with a gentle hiss. May entered the room. "Good morning, class," she greeted brightly, her tone both warm and commanding, each syllable precise, her voice smooth and clear with a natural authority that made the informal setting feel suddenly official. May stood before them like a vision drawn from two worlds, one rooted in heritage, the other in poised modernity. Her deep purple hair, rich as plum wine, was swept into an elegant bun at the crown of her head, held in place by a minimalist silver hairpin that gleamed under the ambient lights. The style gave her a composed, regal air, disciplined, yet not without grace. Her bright, emerald green eyes, which were framed by sleek, frameless reading glasses, scanned the room with a quiet sharpness. There was warmth in them, maternal even, but it was tempered by a piercing intelligence that made it clear she missed nothing. Her gaze was the kind that perceived not only what had been done, but also the reasons behind it. She wore a cream-coloured cheongsam blouse, the silk glinting subtly with every movement. The garment was a work of art in itself, embroidered with faint floral motifs that shimmered like dew on petals when the light caught them right. Its high collar sat neatly beneath her chin, evoking tradition and discipline, while the tailored cut sculpted her form with effortless elegance. It was buttoned with tiny jade clasps that gleamed like droplets of spring rain. Below, a sleek black pencil skirt hugged her silhouette, falling just past the knee. It moved with her in precise harmony, adding to her aura of controlled refinement. She walked like someone who didn't need to rush to command attention. It simply followed her naturally. Her makeup exemplified restraint and ritual. A layer of porcelain-toned foundation gave her skin an almost ethereal glow, like fine china touched by candlelight. Her eyes were subtly enhanced with pink rose shadow and defined by lashes, shaped with feathered mascara, not overly dramatic, but striking all the same. She exuded a subtle elegance, but it was her lipstick, rich, bold red, that delivered the unspoken message. It was the kind of colour that didn't ask for attention. It was declared. In one hand, she carried her personal tablet, filled with notes and lesson plans, held with the same precision and care as one might carry a sword. While Anne and James had long grown used to seeing their mother in her professional element, Nick and Connor exchanged a glance, quietly awestruck by how composed and striking she looked. "Now that's what I call hot," Connor muttered under his breath, eyes wide. Nick gave a low nod, smirking. If the teachers at Stratton dressed like her, I might have actually looked forward to school. Before they could enjoy their moment of teenage foolishness, Anne swivelled sharply in her seat, catching the tail end of their whispers. "Oi!" she hissed, voice low but deadly. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned in, jaw tight. "Don't talk about my mum like that. Show some respect for everything she does to look professional." Both boys snapped forward like guilty schoolchildren, their smirks wiped clean. The weight of Anne's glare lingered behind them, like a threat neither of them wanted to test. May's eyes flicked to them knowingly, but she said nothing, simply tapping on her tablet to begin the day's lesson. Her presence alone was enough to command attention. May stepped to the front of the living room turned classroom, her movements calm and deliberate. The morning light spilt through the tall windows behind her, casting a soft glow across the polished floorboards and the shelves now filled with neatly stacked learning materials. She placed her sleek black tablet on the desk, aligning it with careful precision, as if it were part of a ritual she hadn't performed in years, but remembered perfectly. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she retrieved a slim, collapsible teacher's pointer stick from the side of her tablet case. The smooth metallic click as it extended echoed faintly in the room, drawing the attention of her small but captive audience. Her stance was assured, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, commanding, not through force, but with the gentle gravity of someone who had once stood in front of classrooms filled with hundreds. "Welcome to our first day of school," May declared, her voice carrying a surprising clarity. Bright, confident, and full of purpose. There was an energy in her tone that made even the plush furniture and ornate decor of the mansion's converted lounge seem like the walls of a proper classroom. "I'm your teacher, Miss Shang, and I'm thrilled to have you all here." Her eyes scanned the room with warmth and precision, taking in each child seated before her. James sat upright, legs swinging slightly beneath his chair, already scribbling something in a notebook. Anne leaned forward with quiet curiosity, hands folded neatly on the table. But May's gaze settled on one figure in particular, the newest and arguably most reluctant student. "While I already know my usual students," she continued, "I see we've got two new faces joining us today." She raised the pointer, levelling it in Nick's direction with a playful air of authority. "You, why don't you stand up and introduce yourself to the class?" Nick blinked, caught somewhere between amusement and mild embarrassment. He glanced sideways at Connor, who smirked but didn't say a word. It was clear from the start that the situation was more theatre than necessity. Everyone in the room knew exactly who Nick Adams was, but even so, he recognised the invitation for what it was. A test of sorts, a grounding exercise. He sighed inwardly, rising from his seat with a half smile. Well, okay. May tilted her head slightly, her expression soft, but firm. Please, stand properly when you speak. There was no harshness in her tone, just that patient, unyielding clarity that only real teachers had. Nick straightened reflexively, caught off guard by how easily she slipped into that role. The teachers back at Biggleswade were never like this, since they came across like they hated their jobs and had no real passion behind them. Right. Sorry about that, he said, adjusting his posture. He squared his shoulders, planted his feet evenly, and began again, his voice a little more composed. My name is Nick Andrew Adams. I'm 15 years old, born in Biggleswade. He hesitated a beat, then added, I'm the nephew of the CEO of Midas Industries, but you probably all know that already. There was a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Fatigue, maybe. Or a weariness with how often that name had to precede him like a title. I currently work for him too, he went on with a wry smirk. Though I can't really say what I do, for legal reasons. That earned a few chuckles. Even James grinned, nudging Anne beneath the table. The tension broke a little, as if Nick had just confirmed that yes, he could play along, that he wasn't too grown up for the occasion after all. Thank you, Nick, May said warmly, nodding once. Please take your seat. He turned to go, but habit caught up with him. Thank you, May. She cut in, her grin playful but firm. During school hours, I am to be addressed as Miss Shang, and only Miss Shang. Understood? Nick froze mid-step, then let out a small laugh. Yes, Miss Shang, he replied quickly, slipping back into his chair with mock solemnity. But the smile on his face lingered. It was rare, this feeling. Structure without coldness. Authority without fear. Without missing a beat, May turned on her heel, pointer raised, and aimed it squarely at the next student. Her eyes locked on him with the precision of a conductor signalling the next soloist. And now you... Connor Jenkins stood without delay, his movements fluid and composed. Despite the casual hoodie he wore and the faint crease in his jeans from sitting cross-legged on the carpet earlier, he carried himself with the understated formality of someone raised to respect the space he occupied. With both hands at his sides, he offered May a small, respectful bow, a gesture rooted in his cultural upbringing and mirrored from his training in martial arts. The motion was elegant, genuine, and completely unforced. Hello, everyone, he began, his voice gentle but clear. My name is Connor Ryu Jenkins. I'm 14 years old. He glanced briefly at Nick, who gave him an encouraging nod. I'm Nick's best friend, and I moved here from Biggleswade to help my friend in his time of need. There was a brief pause, just a heartbeat. His words, though calmly delivered, carried the weight of something unspoken, an echo of hardship, of late-night discussions between mother and son, of hurried packing, tearful goodbyes, and the quiet resolve to stand beside someone who mattered. The room fell momentarily still, as if the others could feel it too. My dad's a figurine designer, Connor continued, smoothing his tone, and my mum is a baker. She makes the best melon pan outside of Tokyo. That earned a soft chuckle from Anne, and even May's eyes lit up at the mention of the sweet bread. Excellent, May said warmly. You may sit back down. Thank you, Miss Shang, Connor replied with flawless manners, before settling into his seat again, folding his hands neatly on the desk. May gave a subtle nod of approval, then took a measured step forward. Her pointer rested lightly in her hand, tapping once against her palm with a rhythmic pat-pat, as though calling the room back to order. The light from the window cast a long line across the floor, bisecting the small group in the golden morning sun. Even with our recent changes and new additions, she began, her voice firm but calm, the same rules still apply. There was no room for negotiation in her tone, not out of sternness, but because she believed in the value of structure. In a world where too much had fallen apart, the rules were not just rules, they were anchors. She lifted her pointer slightly, tapping it once more against her hand. Rule number 1, you may speak only when I give you permission. The room was silent, attentive. No one dared break the rhythm. Turning toward her daughter, May raised an eyebrow. An unspoken cue honed over years of shared learning. Anne, what is rule number 2? Anne rose with brisk precision, arms by her sides and chin slightly lifted. There was something distinctly military in her posture, her heels together, spine straight, as if she'd been called to attention. If you know the answer to a question, she recited confidently, raise your hand, stand up, and answer clearly. May nodded approvingly. Excellent. You may sit. Anne sat down with barely a sound, her expression proud. May's gaze shifted to James. James, rule number 3? James stood more slowly, but no less seriously. His voice was a touch quieter than his sister's, but every word was enunciated with care. Turn off all phones and hand them in to you until school is finished. Excellent, May said, her expression warm. Now, I'd like everyone to do exactly that. Switch off your phones. Once powered down, bring them to me so I can store them in the lockbox. We will have no distractions today, and certainly no cheating. There was a quiet shuffle as everyone moved at once. Phones were pulled from their pockets with varying degrees of reluctance. Even Nick, who held onto his device a second longer than necessary, eventually gave a small, resigned sigh and switched it off. May moved from student to student with quiet grace, accepting each phone with a nod of thanks. There was something symbolic about the way she handled them, not as confiscations, but as acts of mutual trust. She wasn't punishing them. She was creating space. Each device went into a sleek, reinforced black lockbox resting on her desk. It had a polished, professional look to it, clearly not something she had picked up from a random shop. The interior was padded and segmented. Everything had its place. Once all the phones were secured, May closed the lid gently and placed her index finger on the biometric scanner at the top. A soft whir and mechanical click followed. The blue LED lit up briefly before fading to indicate the box was locked, accessible only to her. She stepped back, letting the silence settle once more. The world is full of noise, she said quietly. But in this room, we create space to focus, to grow. That is what school is for. The words weren't lectured, they were offered. And somehow, in the quiet that followed, even Nick found himself sitting straighter, more alert. This wasn't just schooling, it was a sanctuary. May gave them all a final, confident look, her expression firm but maternal. "Now then," she said, tucking the pointer beneath her arm, "shall we begin our first lesson?" With a tap on the remote, the holo TV shimmered and reconfigured itself into a sleek digital whiteboard. Using the remote, like a stylus, she wrote the word geography in bold, glowing letters. The title hovered brightly against the translucent display, commanding the class's attention. Heading over to her desk, May retrieved 4 educational data pads. While they resembled standard tablets, these were custom-built for academic use. Volume limited, internet access strictly filtered, and only preloaded with educational games. With practiced efficiency, she handed one to each student. "Since Nick and Connor are new to our classroom," she explained, "we'll be starting today's topic from the beginning so they don't fall behind." She turned back to the holoboard and underlined the word geography before adding a subheading: Scotland. "The first country we'll be exploring is Scotland," she said. Moving smoothly into the lesson, May's tone shifted from light to instructive. Scotland was once part of the United Kingdom, but during the early 21st century, a devastating outbreak changed its fate. In response to the crisis, the British government sealed the country off entirely, cutting off aid, supplies, and communication. The British government left Scotland on its own for 20 years. The room was silent as the gravity of the lesson settled. When the lockdown was finally lifted, Scotland chose not to return to a government that had abandoned them. Instead, they declared full independence. There was no war, no vote, just survival and a clear message: never again. She paused, letting the history sink in before posing her first question. Now, after Scotland became fully independent, what were some of the policies they implemented as a new nation? Nick raised his hand without hesitation. He could feel a sense of inherited pride stir within him. "Yes, Nick," May called on him, intrigued. Nick stood, balancing a quiet nervousness with his eagerness to contribute. Their first major policy was that only those with 2 Scottish parents could become members of the Scottish Parliament. And why was that? May prompted, encouraging him to elaborate. Nick continued with confidence. "Years earlier, a minister who was not originally from Scotland had abused his power. He introduced strict speech laws and had people arrested just for criticising his leadership. Meanwhile, real criminals were overlooked. He ended up resigning in disgrace and fled the country, swearing never to return." May nodded, clearly impressed. "That's an excellent and well-articulated answer, Nick. It shows how historical trauma can shape national identity and why some nations choose such strict measures to protect their sovereignty. You may sit down." May turned her attention to Connor, offering him an encouraging smile. "Connor, can you name another policy?" Connor stood, feeling the slight pressure of the moment. "Yes, Miss Shang. When Scotland reopened its borders, they introduced a tourist tax to support their economy, since they no longer accepted the pound. These measures made travel and purchases more expensive for visitors. It eventually reached a point where only the wealthy could afford to visit places like Edinburgh Castle, Loch Ness, the Kelpies, and Marcus Meechan's burial site. "Excellent," May said with clear approval. "Now, since they no longer use the pound, what currency do they use today?" "That would be the Caledonian, Ms. Shang," Connor replied confidently. "Excellent." May tapped a few notes into her tablet. The Caledonian not only represents their economic independence, but also their cultural identity. Currency is more than just money. It's a symbol of sovereignty and national pride. The lesson moved forward, with Anne and James weighing in on Scotland's transition from isolation to autonomy. Nick offered thoughtful insights into its impact on international trade, while Connor added facts from a documentary he'd watched with his mother. The room was soon alive with discussion, the students engaging in a spirited exploration of nationalism, economics, and the consequences of political decisions. By the end of the session, it was clear. The subject was no ordinary homeschool lesson. Under May's guidance, the living room had transformed into a space for open dialogue, critical thinking, and shared learning. A small class preparing to navigate a complex world. One topic at a time.